Picture this: the winter of 1347 in the English countryside, and I want you to understand just how brutal this really was. We're talking about the little ice age tightening its grip like a vice, and when I say the worst winter in living memory, I mean people who'd survived 60, 70 winters were saying they'd never seen anything like it. This wasn't just cold, this was the kind of cold that kills. In the village of Elmbridge, a young farmer named Thomas the Ploughman is living through what might be the longest night of his life. He's kneeling beside his infant daughter Emma, and every breath she takes sounds like death rattling in her tiny chest. You're a medieval peasant. You've got no thermometer, no weather forecasting, no modern medicine, and winter has become your mortal enemy. Your baby daughter is dying, and there's literally nothing you can do about it except listen to that horrifying sound and pray. His wife Margaret is doing everything a 14th century mother knows how to do. She's pressing dried herbs against little Emma's chest herbs that cost precious coin they didn't have. She's whispering the ancient protection prayers that her grandmother taught her, prayers that go back to when people still remembered the old gods alongside the new. But Thomas knows, with the cold clarity that comes to desperate fathers, that prayers alone won't save his daughter. And here's the thing that really drives home the scale of this catastrophe. Emma isn't the only child in Elmbridge fighting for her life. 7 children in their small village have already died this winter. 7. Including the miller's twin boys, who literally froze to death in their sleep. Their parents woke up to find their sons had simply stopped breathing. Can you imagine? In a village that might have had 50 families, losing 7 children means everyone knows someone who's buried a child that winter. Now, let's talk about their house, because when you understand medieval peasant housing, you understand why winter was such a killer. Picture a wattle and daub cottage that's essentially a framework of wooden poles woven with twigs and branches, then covered with a mixture of mud, clay, and animal dung. In summer, it's adequate shelter. In a normal winter, it's uncomfortable but survivable. But in the winter of 1347, it might as well have been made of paper. Thomas describes their cottage as leaking cold, like a sieve, and that's not poetic exaggeration. Wind whistles through gaps in the daub where the freeze-thaw cycle has cracked the mud. The moisture from their breath, and remember, the whole family is sleeping in essentially one room, freezes on the underside of the thatch roof. So you've got ice forming inside your house. Every night, ice is literally growing on your ceiling. They do have a fire, burning day and night in the central hearth. But here's the cruel joke of medieval heating. Most of that heat goes straight up through the smoke hole in the roof. Think about a campfire. How warm are you when you're sitting next to it versus when you step even a few feet away? Now imagine that fire is your only heat source, and you're trying to warm an entire building where the walls themselves are conducting cold. Thomas and his family huddle together like cattle, and even then, their backs are freezing while their faces burn from the direct heat. Thomas has tried everything his father taught him about winter survival. He's banked earth against the exterior walls. He's hung thick wool coverings, expensive wool that represents a significant portion of their wealth over the worst gaps. He's even brought the pig inside, both for the animal's warmth and because a frozen pig is a dead pig, and a dead pig might mean the difference between eating and starving come spring. But despite all these measures, the floor remains cold as grave earth, and that's not just a caithe, figure of speech. In medieval Britain, graves were dug about 6 feet down, where the earth stays consistently cold year-round. That's how cold Thomas's floor feels under his feet every morning. and the walls weep with condensation that breeds the black mold everyone feared, because they knew instinctively that the black mold meant sickness, even if they didn't understand why. Then comes the moment that changes everything. A travelling merchant named Stephen of York arrives, seeking shelter from a blizzard. Now, travelling merchants in winter were either incredibly brave, incredibly desperate, or incredibly well-informed about routes and shelter. Stephen, it turns out, is the third type. Over weak ale by their smoking fire, and I want you to picture this scene, because it's like something out of a fairy tale. Stephen begins to speak of miracles he's witnessed in the north. Cottages that stayed warm as summer with half the wood, children playing on dry floors, even in January's depths, walls that didn't weep, floors that didn't freeze. To Thomas, listening to his daughter's laboured breathing, this sounds like paradise. But Stephen isn't finished. The secret, he whispers, lies with a man named Master Hugh of Westmoreland, described as the last keeper of the old Roman ways of building. Now, when Stephen says old Roman ways, he's talking about knowledge that's been hidden for 700 years. The Romans left Britain in 410 after Christ, and it's now 1347. Think about that gap longer than the entire history of the United States. And yet, somehow, somewhere in the English countryside, a man named Hugh has preserved engineering secrets from the height of the Roman Empire. But Stephen delivers this information with a warning that makes Thomas's blood run cold. Hugh is dying, and he guards his knowledge jealously, sharing it with none. The old master has spent his entire life keeping these secrets safe from a world that might consider them heretical, and he's not about to start trusting strangers now. As that terrible night wears on, as Emma's breathing grows more and more laboured, Thomas makes a decision that will echo through English history. He will journey north through the frozen forests, wolves or no wolves, and somehow convince this dying master to share his secret. His daughter's life hangs by a thread, and that thread is growing thinner with each passing hour. But what Thomas doesn't know, what he can't know, is that he's about to uncover knowledge that will transform not just his family's survival, but the very nature of English domestic life. He thinks he's embarking on a desperate quest to save one child. In reality, he's about to ignite a revolution that will change how human beings live with winter itself. The question that should be burning in your mind right now is this: what exactly did the Romans know about heating that medieval England had forgotten? And how dangerous could construction techniques possibly be? Thomas's journey north becomes the stuff of medieval nightmares. 5 days of trudging through snow that reaches his hips, and remember, Thomas is probably about 5'6", so we're talking about snow that's 3 feet deep in places. This isn't the kind of winter hiking you do with modern gear and emergency beacons. This is a desperate father walking through a landscape that wants to kill him, with nothing but wool clothing and whatever food he can carry. He sleeps in hollow trees, and when I say that, I mean he's literally crawling inside the trunks of ancient oaks that have rotted out enough to provide shelter. Imagine the cold, the discomfort, the very real possibility that you might not wake up. Medieval people understood hypothermia. Even if they didn't have a word for it, they called it the cold sleep, and they knew it was often permanent. And then there are the wolves. Twice during his journey, Thomas has to climb trees and wait, through what he describes as long, terrifying nights. Picture this: you're exhausted, freezing, clinging to branches in total darkness, and below you, you can hear wolves moving around, maybe testing whether you're going to fall. Medieval wolves weren't the shy, largely harmless creatures we know today. These were animals that had learned to associate human settlements with easy meals, especially in winter, when normal prey was scarce. But when Thomas finally reaches Master Hugh's workshop, nothing, and I mean nothing, could have prepared him for what he finds. He's expecting to meet a humble craftsman living in some improved version of his own cottage. Instead, he discovers what he describes as a warm paradise hidden within crumbling Roman ruins. Now, let's pause here and think about what this means. Thomas has lived his entire life in 14th century England, where Roman ruins dot the landscape like broken teeth. Every English peasant grew up seeing these massive stone foundations, these mysterious walls that seem to serve no purpose, these strange channels cut into stone that no one could explain. The official church position was that these were monuments to pagan excess, reminders of what happened to civilizations that turned away from God. But Master Hugh, white-bearded, bent with age, initially refusing even to speak with this desperate young farmer, has been living inside functional Roman engineering for his entire life. When Thomas's story of little Emma finally softens something in the old master's bitter heart, Hugh does something extraordinary. He leads Thomas down worn stone steps into underground chambers where the genius of Roman heating is still visible. These are hypercourse channels, and when Hugh shows them to Thomas, he's revealing technology that's more sophisticated than anything that will be reinvented in England for another 400 years. Picture this. 2,000 years ago, Roman slaves tended fires that sent hot air, flowing beneath raised floors and up through hollow walls. Entire villas, think buildings the size of modern hotels, stayed comfortable in the dead of winter, using less fuel than Thomas Burns trying to heat one room. Hugh's family has been the guardians of this knowledge through Saxon invasions, Viking raids, and Norman conquest. Think about that timeline. The Saxons arrived in the 5th century, the Vikings began raiding in the 8th century, the Normans conquered in 1066. Through 600 years of social upheaval, invasion, and cultural transformation, Hugh's ancestors kept Roman heating secrets alive. But here's what makes Hugh truly remarkable. His family didn't just preserve the knowledge, they adapted it. Roman hypercausts were designed for Mediterranean climates and wealthy households with unlimited slave labor. Hugh's modifications are specifically engineered for English conditions and peasant resources. This isn't just preservation, it's innovation. The master begins revealing secrets that sound like magic but represent pure engineering genius. River stones, Hugh explains, hold heat like nothing else, especially the smooth grey ones that sing when struck. That singing sound indicates a specific density and composition that maximizes thermal mass. The ratio matters tremendously. For every 3 feet of channel length, 1 handful of stones, no more, no less. Too many stones and the air can't flow properly. Too few and you don't get adequate heat storage. The clay mixture Hugh describes sounds like alchemy. Crushed chalk for thermal conductivity, horsehair for structural integrity, applied in 3 thin layers rather than 1 thick one. Each layer serves a different purpose. The first creates the seal, the second provides strength, the third ensures smooth airflow. Medieval builders who tried to shortcut this process by applying 1 thick layer inevitably failed because thick clay cracks as it dries. But the real genius lies in the channel patterns. Hugh sketches diagrams in the dirt, diagrams that Thomas memorizes like his life depends on it. Because it does. The channels must follow specific geometric patterns that create natural draw, pulling smoke and heat beneath the floor before releasing it up through the walls. This isn't random. It's fluid dynamics that won't be formally understood until the 17th century. But Hugh's family has been applying these principles for over 1,000 years. Thomas realizes he's looking at knowledge that could transform England, but Hugh saves the most crucial secret for last: how to disguise the system as ordinary foundation work. Because here's the thing that really drives home how dangerous this knowledge is. The Bishop of Westmoreland has already burned 2 families as heretics for using what he calls pagan heating arts. burned them, as in tied them to stakes and set them on fire for the crime of keeping their children warm in winter. Though Hugh suspects, with the cynicism of age, that the bishop's own palace employs similar techniques. Medieval authority often worked this way, forbidding the common people from using technologies that the elite quietly employed themselves. As Thomas prepares to leave with this precious knowledge burning in his mind, Hugh gives him something that will prove more valuable than gold, a small bronze medallion bearing the sign of the Old Builders' Guild. "Show this to Martin the stonemason in Doncaster," Hugh says. "He'll help you, though he'll deny knowing me if asked." What Thomas doesn't realize is that he's just been inducted into a secret network that spans England craftsmen and builders who've preserved fragments of Roman knowledge through 7 centuries of suppression. The medallion isn't just a token, it's a passport into a hidden world where the old ways survive in shadows and whispers. But as Thomas begins his journey home, carrying secrets that could save his daughter or get his family burned as heretics, he faces a question that will determine everything. How do you build Roman heating technology in medieval England without anyone noticing you're doing it? Thomas returns home to find Emma barely clinging to life, and Margaret near complete despair. The 5-day journey has aged him years, but he carries something more precious than any treasure. Knowledge that could save not just his daughter, but transform how human beings survive winter itself. The question now isn't whether the Roman heating techniques will work, it's whether Thomas can build them without getting his family killed. Working with desperate efficiency that only a father watching his child die can summon, Thomas enlists his 2 closest friends, William the Thatcher and Robert the Blacksmith. These aren't random choices. William understands roof construction and airflow, crucial for venting the system properly. Robert works with fire and metal every day. He knows heat, draft, and the properties of different materials. But most importantly, these are men Thomas trusts with his life, because that's literally what he's doing. The oath of secrecy they swear isn't some casual promise. In medieval England, keeping your neighbour's dangerous secret could mean the difference between living and burning. Thomas makes them understand that what they're about to build must appear to everyone else as simple cottage repairs, not improvements repairs, because improvements might attract attention, and attention from the wrong people could prove fatal. They begin by carefully excavating beneath the cottage floor, and here's where the real challenge becomes clear. This isn't just digging a hole, they're engineering precise channels that must slope at exactly the right angle to create proper airflow. Too steep, and the hot air rushes through too quickly to transfer heat effectively. Too shallow, and the air stagnates, creating cold spots and potential carbon monoxide accumulation. Hugh's instructions are specific to the degree, but translating those measurements into actual construction proves harder than Thomas imagined. Working at night by rushlight creates its own problems. Rushlight that's dried rush stems dipped in animal fat gives off about as much illumination as a birthday candle. Try doing precision masonry work by birthday candle light, while worried that too much light might attract unwanted attention. They're literally building revolutionary technology in near darkness because discovery could mean death. During the day, Thomas has to maintain the fiction that he's simply gathering materials for normal repairs. He spends hours at the frozen stream, selecting river stones according to Hugh's precise criteria. Each stone must be smooth, dense enough to sing when struck, and sized to fit the channel dimensions while allowing proper airflow. Medieval people didn't have standardized measurements, so Thomas is working by feel, sound, and instinct testing. Hundreds of stones to find the ones that meet specifications he can barely understand. The construction proves a nightmare of trial and error. 3 times the channels collapse before Thomas understands that the proper angle of slope isn't just about the channels themselves. It's about how they interact with the surrounding soil, the moisture content of the clay, the way different stones expand and contract with temperature changes. Each collapse means starting over, and starting over means Emma has less time. The clay mixture becomes another source of frustration. Hugh's recipe sounds simple: clay, crushed chalk, horsehair. But getting the consistency right takes skills Thomas doesn't have. Too wet, and it cracks when drying, creating gaps that destroy the system's efficiency. Too dry, and it doesn't seal properly, allowing heat to escape and cold air to enter. Robert the blacksmith proves invaluable here, because working with furnace clay has given him intuitive understanding of how different mixtures behave under heat. Margaret plays her part with the skill of a master spy. When curious neighbours start wondering why Thomas is suddenly so busy with foundation repairs, Margaret distracts them with fresh bread and carefully selected gossip. She spins stories about fixing a collapsed root cellar that sound boring enough to discourage further questions. When the bailiff comes sniffing around, because bailiffs always notice when peasants start acting differently, Margaret serves him fresh bread, while spinning tales about the miller's daughter that send him off chasing more interesting gossip. The most dangerous moment comes when the bailiff arrives unexpectedly, while Thomas and his friends are frantically trying to cover their work with old boards. Picture this. You're three peasants who've been digging mysterious channels under your cottage. You've got Roman engineering diagrams essentially memorized, and the local authority figure is walking toward your house with the power to investigate anything that strikes him as suspicious. One wrong word, one visible piece of evidence, and you're facing charges of heresy, witchcraft, or practicing forbidden arts. But Margaret saves them all. She intercepts the bailiff with an armload of fresh bread and a story about needing his advice on her troublesome chickens. That's so perfectly mundane and slightly tedious that he's eager to escape after giving perfunctory advice. As he walks away, none of them speak for minutes, because they all understand how close they just came to disaster. After 2 weeks of back-breaking labour conducted in secrecy and fear, the moment of truth arrives. Thomas lights the first fire in the new external firebox, carefully hidden behind what appears to be an ordinary woodpile. The design is Hugh's genius. The firebox looks like a simple outdoor cooking area, something every peasant household might have. Only someone who knew what to look for would notice the carefully constructed channels leading from it toward the cottage foundation. Smoke begins flowing through the channels beneath the floor, and then something happens that Thomas will remember for the rest of his life. Within hours, the miracle begins. The floor stones grow warm to the touch, not burning hot, but genuinely warm, like stone that's been sitting in summer sunlight. Heat rises evenly throughout the cottage instead of concentrating around the central fire. The walls stop weeping moisture as the warm, dry air prevents condensation from forming. For the first time all winter, ice doesn't form inside their home. Emma's breathing eases as warm, dry air replaces the cold damp that's been slowly killing her. Margaret weeps with joy as their daughter's colour returns, as her cough subsides, as she begins to move and make sounds like a healthy baby instead of lying still as death. But triumph turns to terror with frightening speed when Father Benedict arrives with 2 church guards, acting on reports of unnatural warmth and stones that held summer's heat. Someone has noticed that Thomas's cottage stays warm with less wood than anyone else burns. Someone has been watching, listening, reporting. In medieval villages, everybody knows everybody else's business, and unusual warmth in winter is definitely unusual business. The confrontation that follows will determine not just Thomas's fate, but whether Roman heating technology dies with him or spreads across England. As the suspicious priest demands to inspect the cottage, Thomas realizes that everything his family's survival, the secret knowledge, perhaps their very lives hangs on his ability to convince church authority that what they're experiencing isn't heretical magic, but God's own blessing. The inspection that could have ended with Thomas burning at the stake instead becomes the moment when everything changes. Think about the pressure he's under. A suspicious priest, flanked by church guards, demanding to know why his cottage defies the natural order by staying warm in winter, while Thomas has to explain Roman hypocaust technology without admitting that's what it is. Thomas shows Father Benedict the foundation stones, which do indeed look ordinary if you don't know what you're looking at. Margaret, playing her part perfectly, serves hot cider, while Thomas explains their warmth comes from new wool insulation and better chinking half-truths that sound plausible to someone who doesn't understand heating engineering. But Father Benedict remains suspicious, because frankly, he's not stupid. Something unusual is happening here, and unusual things in medieval villages often mean heresy, witchcraft, or both. Then Lord Edmund himself arrives, drawn by reports of a cottage that stays warm on half the usual firewood. And here's where Thomas gets incredibly lucky, because Lord Edmund is exactly the kind of practical medieval lord who cares more about economics than theology. He immediately grasps something that Father Benedict missed. If peasants can stay warm with less wood, they'll be healthier, stronger, more productive. Healthy peasants mean better harvests. Better harvests mean higher rents and more prosperous estates. With calculated brilliance that probably saves Thomas's life, Lord Edmund declares the improvements blessed by God's own inspiration and commissions similar work for his dairy barns. Think about that political maneuver. By claiming divine inspiration for Thomas's work, the Lord makes it impossible for the Church to condemn it without implying that God's blessings are somehow heretical. Father Benedict finds himself in the position of either agreeing that God inspired these improvements or arguing that the Lord's judgment about divine matters is wrong, and medieval priests did not lightly contradict their feudal superiors. But the real catalyst for spreading this technology comes from an unexpected source: the Black Death that sweeps through England the following year. When we talk about the Black Death, we usually focus on the horror, and rightfully so, because it killed somewhere between 30 and 60% of Europe's population. But from Thomas's perspective, the plague creates a strange opportunity. As whole families perish, survivors inherit multiple properties, and crucially, the resources to improve them. A peasant who inherits his brother's cottage, his uncle's tools, and his neighbour's livestock suddenly has the means to invest in better living conditions. More importantly, the massive population loss means labour shortages, which translates to higher wages for survivors. For the first time in generations, ordinary English peasants have disposable income and strong motivation to improve their living situations. Thomas finds himself in unprecedented demand as a master builder. The bronze medallion from Master Hugh opens doors he never knew existed, a hidden network of craftsmen who've preserved fragments of Roman knowledge through centuries of suppression. Martin the stone mason in Doncaster leads him to William the carpenter in Nottingham, who knows about Roman timber joinery techniques. William introduces him to Geoffrey the potter in Leicester, who understands thermal properties of different clays that make better heating channels. Within 5 years, warm cottages begin appearing across the English countryside like flowers after rain. But Thomas and his network have learned to be careful about how they spread the technology. They never call it Roman heating instead. It's improved foundation work or better underfloor ventilation. They disguise hypocaust channels as enhanced root cellars or improved drainage systems. The external fireboxes are always positioned to look like outdoor cooking areas or blacksmiths' forges. The social transformation proves as dramatic as the physical one. When cottages stay warm and dry, children survive winters that would have killed them before. Think about what this means for a society where child mortality in winter could reach 50% in bad years. Families begin planning for children's futures instead of just hoping they'll survive to spring. Women gain the ability to practice detailed crafts through the dark months, instead of spending every waking hour focused purely on survival. Evening gatherings evolve from grim necessities huddling together for warmth into centers of storytelling, music, and community building. Young couples can court in comfort rather than brief, shivering encounters. The very concept of home shifts from mere shelter to sanctuary, and that psychological transformation proves as important as the physical one. Some historians argue this revolution in domestic comfort lays crucial groundwork for England's later dominance, a population that has mastered environmental control, that has learned to think systematically about heat, airflow, and thermal dynamics, proves ready to harness steam and build the factories that will define the Industrial Revolution. The engineering mindset required for effective hypercaust construction translates remarkably well to other mechanical challenges. The legacy lives on in ways that would amaze Thomas. During London's Great Fire of 1666, cottages built with his techniques survive better than mansions, their stone channels acting as fire breaks that prevent flames from spreading through foundations. Even today, renovations of medieval buildings sometimes uncover these mysterious channels, which archaeologists long mistook for drainage systems until someone realized they're too precisely angled and well constructed for simple water management. Perhaps the most satisfying discovery comes in 1992, when archaeologists excavate the bishop's palace in Westmoreland, the same bishop who condemned peasant families for using pagan heating arts. The excavation reveals an extensive hypercaust system, probably installed even as bishops were publicly condemning the practice. Medieval authority at its finest, forbidding commoners from using technologies that the elite quietly employed themselves. Thomas dies peacefully at age 72, surrounded by grandchildren in a cottage warm as summer. His daughter Emma, the baby whose laboured breathing drove him on that desperate winter journey, lives to become a master herbalist, practicing her healing arts in the warm, dry conditions that Roman engineering made possible. Her own children never know the terror of winter that almost claimed her life, because their grandfather refused to accept that cold and death were peasants' inevitable fate. But perhaps the most remarkable thing about Thomas's story is how it illustrates the power of knowledge to transform the world. Roman hypercaust technology wasn't magic, it was engineering, carefully preserved and gradually improved by generations of craftsmen who understood that human ingenuity could triumph over harsh conditions. Thomas didn't invent central heating. He rediscovered it, adapted it, and spread it through a society ready for change. The channels beneath his cottage floor represent something larger than just improved heating. They represent the stubborn human refusal to accept suffering as inevitable, the power of hidden knowledge to emerge when it's needed most, and the way individual desperation can spark revolutions that transform entire civilizations. And it all began with a father who refused to let his daughter die of cold in a world that assumed peasant children were supposed to die of cold. Sometimes the most profound changes start with the simplest refusal to accept that things have to be the way they've always been.